My problem regarding the future of science and some scientific community in India is, as I said, primarily historical. I'm not trying to engage myself in the actual possibilities of science, establishment of scientific institutions, institutes, research, universities, and possibly in the future of the august future of gaining a few more Nobel laureates among Indians. That's not my concern. Primarily because of the fact that I'm not particularly interested in Indian science bringing in Nobel laureates or anything. As Professor Venkateswaran pointed out just now, India is a country which unfortunately boasts of the maximum number of the pauperized population in the world, the maximum number of, again, people who are affected by malnutrition and ill health in the world, people who are homeless, people who are affected by a large number of what we call as environmental hazards in the world. And now, which has barely escaped from the pandemic of COVID recently. And now, I think, as primarily a person who has been involved in people science movement, I think that the primary duty of science and scientists is not only to discover the intricacies of cosmos, definitely they will have to do it, but also to see to it that these discoveries are made use of for the uplift of about 1/6 of the population in the world now languishing in India. So this particular duty of the scientist cannot be solved by the Indian science bringing in a number of Nobel laureates, or the Indian science actually trying to establish themselves at the top of institutes. The Indian science, for example, can bring in more Satya Nadellas and Sundar Pichais on one side. So the Indian science will not go much beyond that. Whether the Indian science is actually capable of doing it is my problem. Why I am saying it is because of some historical reasons which are possibly outside science. One historical issue has been already been hinted at by Professor Venkateswaran just now, that the Indian science, I am quoting the word Indian science in a different sense from what, for example, the government of India tries to portray as Indian science, which I will come to in a minute. When I'm talking about Indian science, I'm talking about scientific temper, the practice of science in India at present, which is not the creation of a few intellectuals, which is not the creation of the type of movement which we had in Europe which we call as enlightenment. The type of movement which developed in Europe again, which we call as 16th century, 17th century scientific revolution. We have never had any of those things. We have had a renaissance, definitely. And that renaissance is not something that actually percolated down to a systematic kind of challenge to the actually existing Indian ethos or the Indian systemic forms of systemic social forms in many respects. We never challenged the caste society in India. We never challenged the dominance of religiosity in India. And in fact, we actually epitomized the spiritual tradition in India and talked about it as Eastern traditions. We talked about, in fact, about the great contributions of India in terms of spiritual gains and contrasted with the material kind of prosperity that the West actually developed. And instead of that, this is what the intellectuals did. But what came about in the form of scientific temper was basically the contribution of the socio-political movements in India, which is outside, mostly outside. When he mentioned Sir P.C. Ray, but P.C. Ray was also an activist in several respects. He was not a pure scientist. So that way, it is from the activists, the social activists in India. It is from the national movement in India, the growth of political consciousness in India, that also gave rise to the concept of scientific temper and the necessity of usage of science as a kind of what you call movement which will transform Indian population to give something new towards the world as well as towards the growth of India. It is from this basic idea that in fact Jawaharlal Nehru, which he mentioned again, Jawaharlal Nehru talked about the science, the growth, the importance of science, technology, and the adventure of ideas in the case of the growth of India as a new nation, the problematic of national reconstruction, which he actually put forward. Now, science was therefore embedded in natural reconstruction. Scientific temper was considered at the basis of a new kind of India which is based on scientific temper. Scientific temper becoming the common sense of India. But as unfortunately, as we know very well, that never happened actually. We never had an India which actually based ourselves on scientific temper and the growth of scientific temper as the common sense of India. There was nothing like that. Instead of that, science actually became a sort of magical showpiece by which we try to display our space technology. By which I'm not questioning space technology or the achievements of space technology or anything. But we try to demonstrate the growth of science in terms of space technology, in terms of atomic energy, in terms of numerous institutes, including the Indian Institute of Science or the TIFR or some other institutions. But apart from these institutions and a few Nobel laureates, including Subramanian Chandrasekhar or from C.V. Raman to others, we actually presented them as the achievements of Indian science. But they never thought that actually Indian science goes much beyond these achievements, so-called achievements. And it should have gone down to the people as a whole and trying to transform the population of India from the point of view of a new scientific community. So it is in this sense that our problem actually developed. In fact, what happened was that science became an academically elitist kind of field. an enterprise rather than a popular kind of an idiom by which people can actually converse in terms of science. That is one basic problem that we faced from the beginning. The second thing is that once we came down to this kind of level, what happened was that then in our education institutions, this affected the education institutions seriously. Science, I mean, I'm not talking in terms of colonial impact on science or anything of that kind, but I'm only mentioning one serious problem with the colonial education system itself, where science was just one among the features of the multidisciplinary framework. See, it was just one among them. Our children were taught social science. Our children were taught value education, which had nothing to do with science, which was something very different from that of science. We were taught mathematics, we taught language, and science, in the sense of general science, became just one of the basic, what you call knowledge areas in which the children will have to learn themselves. So if that once that became the major feature, what about the overall structure of an educational program which actually tries to develop national reconstruction in any form? There has to be scientific temper, that scientific temper should have been treated as a value. The scientific temper should have been treated as a kind of a basic eminence of what we call as the civic responsibility of the people. In fact, citizenship should have been actually been developed on the point of not only on the question of nationality or secularism or democracy, definitely. These are all very important. I'm not saying that they are not unimportant. At the same level, along with secularism, democracy, etc., scientific temper should have been treated at the same level. But that never took place, primarily because of the fact that, as a non scientist, for example, a person who is outside science, we are made to treat about science as another discipline, which has got typical elitist characteristics and which actually does not belong to us, primarily because they are actually the contribution of the people who are actually the best students, the brilliant students. The brilliant and the best will learn to go to science, and the duds like us, for example, will learn to go somewhere else. If that is the case, if that kind of a division takes place, then you can say that there is a substantial large number of people who actually are thrown outside science primarily because of the nature of our education system itself. This is one serious defect that primarily came into existence. And the second defect that actually developed was the linking up of science as technology or the treatment of science as technoscience. And when I'm trying to talk about technoscience in that respect, we even now, when we talk about science here or various other disciplines, we talk about Dr. Somnath, Professor Somnath as basically the greatest scientist in India. I'm not saying that he should not become that. I'm not saying that. But we know that he is not. But the point is that because of the nature of the relationship between science and technology, you see, the best scientist in India, possibly who became one of the presidents in India, was an engineer, and he was called a scientist and remains a scientist even now. Once that happens, then there is a problem of the question of what exactly is science. Actually, what exactly is science? How do we actually look at science? This is another problem that comes in. And when we discuss what exactly is science, then science becomes a set of formulations, set of equations, a kind of thought process. And the thought process which actually leads to a technological form. And then, from the point of view of some of the recent philosophers, science becomes a discourse. Once science becomes a discourse, then there is a problem again. You see, look at medicine, for example. If, for example, you treat some medicine as a discourse, I'm deviating from whatever I wrote in my small note, which you can excuse me for that. You see, medicine, for example, you see, once medicine becomes, it becomes a discourse, then what happens is that Ayurveda, homeopathy, you see, any kind of medicine, medical practice will be treated along with modern medicine without any distinction. So once that takes place, then what happens is that you can actually treat science and discourse not in terms of its technological feasibility, in terms of its efficacy. And once this is treated as efficacy, then one can always argue that, for example, homeopathy has got the same kind of efficacy as modern medicine. Then how do we distinguish scientific progress? How do we distinguish scientific progress then in any sense, in any way? So the only kind of criteria by which scientific progress can be determined is not in terms of, for example, the new views of the universe, the new views of life, the new words of society that scientific actually progress actually brings into existence. Instead of that, it is actually looked at it from the point of efficacy that it actually brings forth. That efficacy can be determined, in fact, in a very subjective fashion. This is what actually resulted in, what the present government of India calls as Indian science. So I'm only pointing out this possibility. See, once this happens, you go to a situation where, for example, the Savatar, can be treated in the same way as Darwin's evolution. Primarily because of the fact that if Darwin's evolution is a discursive, why can't the Dashavatar has got an equal kind of, discursive form as Darwin's evolution? How, for example, we will be able to distinguish between these two? How will, for example, we will be able to distinguish in terms of the growth of knowledge, in terms of the actual, real scientific kind of methodological evolution of science itself, and tries to which actually rejects the older forms of, older forms of conclusions and derives new forms. Science actually grew through various kinds of this fight of rejection of older forms and building new forms. You've got vital force theory, you've got phlogiston theory, and you've got a number of other theories which have been rejected by the scientific evolution itself. Now, this means that new forms of knowledge are created which actually rejects the older forms of knowledge, older worldviews, and new worldviews are created. And that is something which actually any student of science should have been taught. Any student of science should have been taught that. They should have been taught, for example, that Copernicus actually rejected Ptolemaic worldview. Copernicus actually rejected Ptolemaic worldview, and a new worldview actually was brought into existence. I'm looking at, as I said, from the point of view of historian, you can see that. They should have been taught that. They should have been taught how, for example, Einstein, for example, transformed and modified the Newtonian view of the universe. They should have been taught that instead of there being, taught in terms of a theory of relativity or something. Which means that there is a theory only. You've got a theory, but the theory actually relates a lot of things which have been done earlier. And quantum mechanics similarly questioning a larger number of concepts regarding our own position, space, time, etc. They should have been taught. And we don't teach them anything. We teach them actually only the actual conclusions and say that this is effective in this technology. Please, quantum physics becomes important because quantum encryption becomes important. Quantum computers are being created, therefore quantum physics is important. Is that the way that one should tell? A child should learn science? Is that the way that one should learn science at all? Because atomic energy becomes important because Hiroshima and Nagasaki and bombs. So it's a destructive weapon. Is atom a destructive weapon? Splitting the atom, in fact, is destructive. Do we portray it like that? Well, can any kind of research be conducted because saying that something is destructive and we go ahead and do research? That is where the whole question military industrial complex, which was raised earlier, actually becomes very important. So this is the problem which we are facing. So if for example, we are treating actually science in terms of as a discourse, which results in the efficacy, the practical efficacy of the particular scientific inputs in terms of our technology, then people will ask, why can't, if for example magic is effective, why can't we use it? Magic is effective, why can't we use it? If somebody goes and tells that, you see, using medicine of the Adivasi is effective, why can't we use it? Where is the science, therefore? Where is the science there? And if that happens, you've got a situation where, for example, as I said earlier, Vedic mathematics can be taught the same way as you see, modern mathematics can be taught, and we in fact find it difficult saying that except by pointing out, no, this is Hindutva, politics, etc. Apart from that, a scientist will find it difficult to counter that, you know, counter that argument. If Vedic mathematics is taught, because Vedic mathematics proved to be effective at some time. How can we say that we cannot teach them? It is not only the question of the actual decline of science in this fashion, in which a substantially large number of the new generation actually don't learn science. They learn science simply as a discipline, which leads them to a job, which leads them to actually reaching the upper echelons of society, possibly get them to Cambridge or Oxford or somewhere. You see, apart from that, how do we tell them that, for example, no, that is not the science you are going to learn. The science is something that you are going to learn by which our Indians, the ordinary Indians who are actually being impoverished, who are environmentally destroyed, you see, then these are the people who learn to be resurrected, they will be reclaimed. And you have to have a new methods of doing it. This or if this is not addressed, what will happen is that tomorrow or day after tomorrow, somebody will, teach science that you see Bharadwaja, I think it is Bharadwaja, I think, who, I don't know, Professor Venkateshwar, you can tell me. The Bharadwaja, I think, is supposed to have conducted, you see, ICBMs, isn't it? You are not listening. I think it must be Bharadwaja who actually constructed ICBMs somewhere in 5th century. See, Bharadwaja. you're got people who want to learn that, you see. Bharadwaja constructed ICBMs in 5th century CE. You see. And we have got genetic kind of modification that was taking place in Mahabharata. All these things you'll have to learn, and people will learn it as if it is science. People will learn it as if it is science. So, therefore, this is the problem. That we are going to actually posit science as a set of knowledge forms that not only tries to unravel the cosmos, but also leads human beings to a new form of society. Leads human beings to a new form of society, a new society where, for example, this forms of where scientific temper becomes a common sense of the people, where they are able to sort of criticize, all those which have been which have been actually should have been rejected long time back. They should be rejected, and new forms of social forms and civilizational forms and scientific practice are to be developed. If that is not taking place, I'm sure that future of science will be key. India will be just another discipline, just another discipline where majority of intellectuals will simply reproduce what exactly has been going on elsewhere in the world. They'll simply reproduce, and they'll reproduce in such a fashion that they'll get their PhDs or postdoctoral fellowships or whatever outside India, and possibly become Nobel laureates as a part of the world's science, and Indian people will be left without any support or without any kind of you know uh, benefit from the science education in India. So this is the problem that I'm trying to put forward to you, and I'm sorry that I've not taken too much of time. I hope this is a problem which I'm putting forward to you, because if this is not addressed, you see, where you are going to reformulate the concept of scientific temper, you are going to reformulate what exactly is meant by science in terms of not only regarding the cosmic cognitive implications of science, but also what will do to, not in terms of technology, but to develop a new mindset among the people, the critical mindset among the people. And this critical mindset, the interrogative, investigative mindset among the people becomes important rather than slavish kind of obedience to whatever that has been given to them. So that is the crucial difference that one would have to stress upon when we discuss the future of science.